Welcome to Xochitl. This is a podcast about poetic thinking where we share with you a different perspective of the social world. Every episode, we take a topic or a concept and we use the lens of philosophy, psychology, mythology, and art to analyze the wonderful horrors of the modern world. My name is Andrea Martinez.
My name is Andrea Padilla. And right before we started, we decided not to say how long we've taken to record another episode. We've just, and I realized, I was sharing with Andrea that we just pick a subject and it just takes us a lot. We just chew it and chew it and chew it. And then one day we say, okay, fine, let's kind of do it. And what's funny is that sometimes when we chew it, we're not actually researching, we're just chewing it ourselves.
Thinking about it. I think it's a little bit like Lacanian therapy, where you are not like the therapeutic or the psychoanalytic process is happening also outside of therapy, right? Like it's not, normally we think of therapy as the half an hour or the hour that we spend in the clinic or in the on the couch in the dynamic.
Transfer.
Right? But for Lacanian psychoanalysts, it happens also in between the time between one session and another. So we are kind of doing something similar, I suppose.
I think it's mostly, and we'll start talking about what we're going to talk pretty soon, but mostly it's also like an exercise on memory, which I would say it's very important for poetic thinking. Without memory, there is no poetic thinking, which is how, for me, it's always we pick a subject and I think how this subject, and to think that I need to remember, to reflect and remember how that word, that concept, that image has been in my life, how I've experienced it, where I have seen it, where I have been taught it exists or whatever. So it is also
let it
memory.
Let it transform, right? So when we were planning on the Uncanny, we had certain ideas, but then it kind of changed and into what the episode then became. But same with today. Like we started with some notes, but now what we have today probably will be not anything like we had originally thought. And I think that's also part of poetic thinking. Let the concept transform you and
yeah,
the conversation.
And in in Spanish it works a little bit better because it's the same word, but you kind of rehearse, you practice the concept. It's like this. If we were in theater, we would be rehearsing it.
In German, sorry, I just remember this from my lectures on Hegel. The word for concept is Begriff. Apologies to the German speakers out there whose language I might be butchering with my terrible pronunciation. And to Begriff is to like get a grasp of something, right? So to grasp the concept is like also, it's a process, right? It's not just like whatever stable kind of immobile, right? But it like there's this feeling of movement, of grasping the concepts that we're going to talk about today, which is
degeneration and / degradation, or its relation to process of degradation. Is that the word?
Degradation. Yeah. So yes. I think you and I both did a little bit of just like basic looking into dictionaries of what is degradation and degeneration. And obviously to degrade something is to make it less or to make it inferior than what it's meant to be. Whereas to degenerate is if you take away the de, right, the prefix. To generate, right, is to create, to grow. And to degenerate is to go backwards, right? So they're like, if you look at the dictionary, they show up as near synonyms to each other, but there's like that tiny difference, which generation actually is generation in itself, and therefore generation is a process of growth and creation, right?
And I would say that there is a connection. We would get to it later on, but there's also like a moral, I'd say, a moral connotation in the sense that, for instance, what has been or could be labeled degenerate bodies, those bodies that are degenerate become degraded by the morale of the times. That is, of course, always shifting because nothing is ever fixed. But well, at least for some periods of time, it's set, and that gets involved directly with certain bodies that are labeled, for instance, degenerate, no? In terms of, well, yeah.
You're talking about the physical aspect.
Degenerates.
I was thinking, of course, in terms of the morality of it, when you call somebody a degenerate, right? And like initially when we're talking about this episode, we were thinking in terms of literary references of what would be considered degenerate, right? And from that moral standpoint, like, of course, you think of degenerate as the meaning is like somebody who instead of growing is like the reverse, right? But we also talk about degenerate as somebody who does something unthinkable morally, right? Or that when we think about what we are meant to be, like the superego of society, but also in terms of values and ethics and whatnot, a degenerate is a person who goes against that in a severe way that, like, clashes with what we think we are meant to be. Now,
and I think,
yeah,
because you renounce kind of, or your action makes you so against the humanity as, like we say in Spanish, el género humano,
yeah, the
human
human
species as a
genre,
species.
but we say
As a,
género for
no,
like,
it's as a species. In English is as a species, but in Spanish it has to do with, we are a type of generation in terms that we are the becoming of humanity. That is
exactly.
kind of what it means. Yeah. And it's interesting because you get yourself detached from that when you do something radical, that goes, or could be seemed for the morale, that goes against
The
the human,
generation or the generating of the human
of the human.
unfolding,
Yeah,
flourishing,
so that
whatever.
is why women have, women's bodies, for instance, have also been in various points in history be called degenerate, or why homosexuality and the queer body has been called, as something that's gone not the way that is supposed to go in terms of growth, but has taken a tour that makes it degenerate. No, not that goes against the generation of us.
If the mandate,
And
of course, and like, of course, the calling of homosexuality as degenerate, it comes from this very biological kind of, like, um procreation focused view of biology and humanity, right? Whereas,
and the satanization, is that, yes, is that a
yes,
word
it's
in
sensation,
English?
yeah.
Forgive me, sometimes today English seems uncanny to me. um of sexuality, just
Yeah,
because of what I the pairing of reproductive function with sexuality, um forced, or not, a force is not the word I need, but is important in why sexuality later becomes satanized, because
of
all
course,
sexual acts that don't generate
are
humans
degenerates.
are degenerate. Yeah.
I'm glad that you brought up sexuality, because actually one of the authors that I want to reference today is mostly known for her books on sexuality, and she talks about this division, initially apparently written about by Octavio Paz in The Double Flame, the separation of eroticism and sexuality, right? So you're talking about you were talking about it in a little bit different terms, but like she says that of course sexuality, right, was always very tied to procreation and reproduction and this kind of, and then obviously to religion, right? Whereas eroticism, you know, it's like they overlap, but they're not the same. The erotic doesn't have to be tied to you know, like
Sexual function.
sexual, exactly, right? And I'll go back to her as we continue to talk about this, but Esther Perel, she wrote her first major book was Mating in Captivity, right, which is, she talks about the relationships of the contemporary society, Western society in particular. She lives in New York, so more related to American society in terms of how we fail at romantic relationships nowadays. And one of the main theses in her book is that we may, like, mating in captivity, like we are captive of ourselves, right? Because we want that romantic partner, this belief in romantic love in the one, to satisfy all of our social needs, right? They need to be our best friend, our lover, our emotional support, we need to share the same interests, political views, whatever. And that was not the case in like in a more communal society, right? So this society, right, that we're meant to think of as more modern, more civilized, more generating, right, actually is kind of weakening our ties, not just with others, but even to those who we have been led to believe are meant to be the one thing, right, the most important relationship of all, which is the romantic partner.
And the thing with captivity, right? We are a land of the free, home of the brave. And I mean, you're talking about New York, right? American culture, land of the free and mating in captivity.
Mm.
This reminds me of Salvador Dali's Poetics.
Mm-hmm.
He, I think I know I've talked about this before, but it's never ending and quotable always. It's called Millet's Angelus, I guess. No, the tragic myth of Millet's Angelus. He's talking about um, a painting by Millet, or Millet, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
That is this Angelus. It's two figures praying, allegedly the Angelus, which is prayed at noon, and with a basket between them. It's a man and a woman. And Dali says there is no way these people are praying the Angelus because the shadows are all wrong. Like the light is the light of dawn and dusk. So we don't know if it's early morning or late, evening. And whatever, long story short, he talks about how there is a lot of atavisms going on, atavic imagery and psychology going on in this painting. And one of his hermeneutics around the painting is that she is like in a prayer mantis position. And he says, like, well, anyway, he talks about how praying mantis eat their mate in copulation, but when in captivity, like these two shepherds, he's going to link the fact that they are actually in front of a stillborn, not a basket. That's kind of the spoiler. He makes he does some x-rays on the painting because he has a suspicion that there is not a basket there, and it's so weird because it's called the Angelus and it's not midday, so he is Dali already, and they lend him the thing, and so he does
Wow.
some x-rays, and there is like the first sketch of the thing is a small coffin. So
Wow.
he says, yes, he says, this woman who is clearly a Protestant campesina, how do you say this?
Peasant.
Peasant, Protestant peasant, whose sexuality is complete erotica, who has no erotic life, and her sexual experience is completely also restrained to sexual religious norms. She's going to go praying mantis on the man because we are mating in captivity. And she is so angry that they had made this baby with such effort, and then the baby dies. And now we are going to have to go back to having that crazy act that is looked with such a degenerate act, almost like erotica becomes, in the most conservative lecture, I mean, reading of the Bible and etc., that goes through Christianity, I mean, as almost degenerate. Like, that's why you have to come inside and always make baby. Like, if you tickle, you sin.
Yeah, of course. Funny because also Esther Perel mentions that sexuality was talked about in medicine for decades without mention of pleasure, right? Or eroticism. So how easily and of course he talks about sexuality as a lens to analyze the changes in society, right? Because of how what sexuality represents for any civilization, but also the dramatic changes that happen to sexuality also have, or our view of sexuality, like if you think about the birth control pill, for instance, right? The impact that has, for example, if you look at it from the viewpoint of religion or morality, right, in terms of our degeneration, right? Because now from that viewpoint we have sex for not to procreate, but for pleasure, right?
Pleasure. Right. And as I was lighting up this cigarette, forgive me, mother. I say forgive me, mother, with a purpose, because in our present time, for instance, this kind of that once were very socialized addictions, like like drinking over a meeting in the 50s and just smoking on a plane, are looked down. Like, we look down on that, and that's why that's degrading, you know. And to sometimes to that's what happens to the one that stops being addicted, you know. It has like this sense of conversion, like if it was a religion.
Of
like
course.
And I quote, shout out for Hans Georg Müller, or however his last name, in terms of civil religion. How, you know, for people that stop having an addiction, you look down as degenerates, these people that haven't, you know, found the light and are still poisoning their bodies or what
also because we live in a culture, I mean, of course, I agree with this civil religion, but of self-improvement, right? Like we
part of our civil religion to self-improve.
And of course, this began in the 60s, you know, with the concept of self-actualization with Maslow, and also with the rise of capitalism and, you know, Americanized globalization. And now, everything is about how to, improve myself so that I can feel better, so I can have better self-esteem, so I can be more satisfied, more happy. And it's all now packaged in, podcasts, spa retreats, yoga, whatever, right? But and I'm waiting for you to come to your Foucauldian point.
Yeah, I'm taking a while, but
I'm like,
just to get there, I'm gonna say that the Wikipedia page on that social degeneration, for instance, draws a lot from these early biologists like Lamarck and stuff, that they were experimenting with the crossing of certain well, not species, but within the species, like well, Lamarckian biology. Come on, kids, we all went to junior high, I guess. And how that is linked with eugenics, with the improvement of our biology, and how social degradation or speaks a lot about this, how we should um, or speaks about the processes of how society has or can degrade itself instead of better itself. And that also makes us close to fascism and control states. And in that way, I would like to talk about what Michel Foucault says about history. He's in Hermeneutics of the Subject, I guess it would be the title in English. He says how he writes that history is degrading because knowing truth, I mean truth, and truth by, in a way, knowing history or the origin of things. The origin of things is the truth of the thing. And truth is degrading because there is no golden era. What comes before us is not the speech of the gods. It's just us in the cave panicking about for survival and kind of grasping the idea that we might be able to do something about it ourselves and maybe do something together. And communication, language,
but
yada
also,
yada.
like you said, there's no such thing as the golden era. There's no, like, the Renaissance happened in like just one specific part of the world, right? And that by which we measure most of the world's history, right? Which is the West. I was reading, well, no, I was not reading, I lie. I was read a line from, of course, I don't remember the title of the book, but the writer is Abrahams. Is Power and Hegemony, something like this. It's a book on history, and I might need to correct this later on. Like American imperialism. So this is how the truth is can be degrading. So President Roosevelt, who is often talked about under a very positive light, one of the best presidents of the United States in the 20th century, always, even within the his role in the Second World War, there's always like even within like center left circles, like, okay, Roosevelt is all right. And in this part of the book, they talk about how Roosevelt was given a knife made out of the bones of the arm of a Japanese man, and that this was not an isolated occasion, right? That actually American soldiers brought back skulls of Japanese men and gave them as gifts or sort of trophies or whatever. And that even Roosevelt himself, I can't remember exactly what the quote
Very
is, but
very totemic.
Very totemic, but Roosevelt made some sort of like joke or like snarky remark about the knife, right? So for people maybe in the United States who might, think of Roosevelt as this like, statesman of like, moral standing or whatever, like this like a revelation like this, it surprised me. And I don't particularly like Roosevelt, right? That like that's, well, that goes without saying. But you know, like that this kind of thing that happens in, or happened in the 20th century, where like we all thought of ourselves as like, you know, not all of us, because some of us were not born, but as, you know, Francis Fukuyama's end of history, and like, you know, this is the pinnacle of civilization, and we've done all this crap, and yet
the what happens behind closed doors and is shameful and truthful. Also, this from another American statesman, and it happened. This didn't happen behind closed doors, but what you talked about Roosevelt just now reminded me. From another American statesman, President Obama has this. We've talked about this before, I think. The time where he, you know, not agrees, but comes clean and says like, yeah, some folks were killed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How that's so degrading. That is so degrading to call some, you know, human life, you know, some folks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
some folks die.
Sorry, the title of the book is Power and Primacy by A.B. Abrahams. If you
A.B.
want
Abrams,
Power
not
and
be
Primacy.
confused with J.J. Abrams, from which I thank you for giving us Alias. A.B. Abrams. Okay. Abrahams.
Abrahams, yes. Um, okay, so just to step away from history and not
Socialness.
entirely disconnected, to go back of the realm of psychology and mental health. So I mentioned Esther Perel, and I was like, so when we started planning the episode, I was reading Gabor Mate, who recently published The Myth of Normal. And I thought about him in terms of degradation and degeneration, because he quotes a lot of research done on autoimmune diseases which degrade the body, and their direct correlation with trauma and stress and chronic long-term stress. So I mentioned Gabor Mate because, well, like, I mean, Gabor Mate and Esther Perel are very public figures. Gabor Mate is a medical doctor that then went into psychology, and Esther Perel is just, not just as in degradingly, but she didn't do medicine, but did psychology and then continued on to family therapy and systems therapy. And they have Gabor Mate, I'll go back to Gabor Mate as this look into disease, right? And disease in particular, like autoimmune, that like the body that attacks itself, as deeply connected to the wounds that the mind carries, right? And so he talks about both healing and disease, not as a kind of snap of the fingers, like now you have cancer, right? Or now you're cured, but as process, right? And I think that intuitively, for instance, particularly in my case, since the times that I was like a teenager, I always kind of ignorantly in a sense, but intuitively in another way, that disease was not something that just it's not like it can just
It doesn't
happen.
come from nothing.
It doesn't
Nothing
come
comes from nothing.
exactly, right? And that, of course, in a different sense, our bodies age and our bodies degrade over time, and that in itself, you know, the opposition to that degradation is in itself its own kind of degradation, but also the processes that we engage in psychologically can also impact our physical degradation, right? So I thought about Mate in relation to this, because we tend to view, I think, health and disease as isolated incidents, right? Or in a more linear A to B or B to C, right? Health to illness, illness to health. Whereas, it's more of a cycle, like you said, with the truth can be degrading, right? So if I tell you, right, that in order for you to change your process of healing, you need to integrate a more holistic approach of therapy or whatnot, you might find that very surprising, right? You might not.
No, you have to integrate the trauma, the miasma.
Exactly.
I would say that in terms of the poetics of tragedy, trauma, or that can be also kind of be linked to sin. Trauma can be sinful or come from a sinful action. It's this what is the miasma in the poetics of tragedy, which is this criminal origin that has set off all these tragic events. And in order to actually better oneself, to better oneself, to be able to govern ourselves better, if we're thinking Seneca, the ataraxia and autoarchia, or I don't know how to say it in English, one must integrate the shadow, in terms of young.
Yeah.
And that can be, linked with, of course, physical and mental health, which is both things. And wait, just one more thing. All of the things you were saying also reminded me of one of my favorite animations. I don't know if it's an anime. It comes from Asia, but I don't know if every animation that comes from Asia is anime. I think it is Japanese, because it's Mononoke, and that's Japanese.
Yes. Mononoke is Japanese.
The vengeance demon that gets attacked with or defeated by truth and regret being revealed. What is the truth and regret in this situation? Is feeding the Mononoke, right? But anyway, these Mononoke are defeated by the medicine seller. And in one of the with one of the Mononoke, or the Mononoke's victims, he says this: personally, the very belief that medicine alone can cure one's ailments does not sit well with me.
Yeah,
I think it's a lot to do with what you were
absolutely
saying.
I actually also want to use another quote, again, because it's the first quote in Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Neuron, but also because it's by this other psychoanalyst who is Eric Fromm. So Eric Fromm wrote The Man in Search of Sense, or something like this. But he also wrote The Sane Society. And one of the quotes that Gabor Mate takes from Eric Fromm, which I also really like, which I think is related to our topic, is the fact that millions of people share the same vices does not make these vices virtues. The fact that they share so many errors does not make the errors to be truths. And the fact that millions of people share the same forms of mental pathology does not make these people sane. So, I mean, it's not like he might be referring to the Western society the way Gabor Mate is referring to Western Americanized society. But it's something, obviously, to think about in terms of what are those virtues? What is, what are we speaking of in terms of moral virtues? What is considered to be virtuous, right? Or virtue signaling, the way we call it now as well in social media. What do we think of in terms of?
Oh yes, this is a thing. Virtue signaling.
Yeah,
I did not know this.
So if you post, for example, like, I mean, this is going to be very maybe
Ace.
so if you post a Black Lives Matter symbol in your whatever stickers in social media, right, you're virtue signaling, right? That like that you are of a certain front, you're woke or you're this or you're that. Virtue signaling is to say to use certain agreed on
Facts.
yeah, to speak to the audience, to the general peer, as Georg would say. That
Yeah.
is virtue signaling.
Okay. So, of course, as always, we didn't speak about everything that can be spoken in terms of what is degeneration or degradation. But also to talk about another pop culture reference that has apparently also had a big process of degradation is Fight Club, which is what David Fincher's Fight Club.
Mm-hmm.
Is this correct?
Is Fisher or Fincher?
Fincher.
Ah,
I
okay. See,
know
it's
this.
Fincher. See.
I mean, not because I know this, because I love him, just because I know so many men that love him. So it's Fincher.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this man who also works usually a lot with Trent Reznor, in this film, there's well, you haven't watched Fight Club. I'm not gonna go through the whole anecdote because we'd stay here forever.
There are 3 rules of Fight Club.
We do not talk about Fight Club. Yeah. Well, actually, I start smoking because this is very imagery, very image oriented. Perhaps proto-profil. Well, no, not proto-prophilicity because you don't smoke that much in pictures, but whatever. I started smoking because of Marla Singer, of course.
Of
Like
course, Marla
all of us
Singer.
victims of whatever.
Of Marla Singer.
Of
But you
Marla
know,
Singer.
that line that Edward Norton says about the IKEA catalog
Oh yeah.
has like initially defined, but then is the precedent for my attitude towards IKEA. Because in Mexico, I don't think we have IKEA, but like in Europe, it's all
Now
over.
we do. Now we do.
Oh,
Or they do in the city. In the city.
Okay, go on about Fight Club.
Well, I guess to be, just the these two men, right? Tyler Durden and this man that we call Jack because he always talks about, I'm Jack's mad liver. He talked in third person because he's reading this book or whatever.
I'm Jack's mad liver. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. But the Tyler Durden, which is the character played by Brad Pitt, is bullies in a way. He degrades Jack a lot. And at the same time, he kind of always goes with him. But just the fact that when he gives him like that first fight, that then the truth in the end. And
yes.
the truth is, spoiler alert. Spoiler alert.
We don't believe in spoilers.
Wait,
remember?
I know, but our listeners, viewers might, so
we don't care.
We might not have evangelized them well enough. Anyway, Tyler Durden, after just being drunk with this guy that kind of idolizes him because he's this anarchic, self-aware, cocky individual, just hits him, and they start this fist fight, and they find this process of fighting which could kind of be degrading the other, I am victor over you, becomes this freedom, they become free of all of this attachments, and it's kind of what like the radical act of against society that you were speaking of, because they want to destroy a lot of stuff. They want to destroy money, for instance, the banks, because they believe that that's what stops us from living, of being free. But for the ones that are in the matrix, that act is an act of terrorism that threatens our life, and in that sense our generation. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. They also have this very famous line that says like, I am not, you are not a beautiful and unique snowflake, which is also kind of degrading. And you must, in order to become an agent of Fight Club, you must go through these principles in your body, or this other huge one, where I don't remember the name of the blonde dude that's played by the despicable Jared Leto.
Yes.
Where Tyler Durden says he beats him, he beats the crap out of him. And not Tyler Durden, or we don't know it's him yet, but Jack says, I felt the need to destroy something beautiful, something like this. And, beauty Westernly generates. It's a fountain of inspiration, of aesthetics, etc., etc. So to kill something beautiful, it's also a degenerate act for that status quo. And that's it.
I mean, I think
in the end, I would just finish the end and say I did the whole thing. Tyler Durden and Jack are but one and the same.
Da, 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 and then the Pixies
song begins. Where is my mind? Yeah, where is my mind? Yeah. But, so he was actually beating himself, degrading himself.
I have two things to say. So one is that, of course, the meaning of Fight Club changed over the course of 2 decades, right? Like when we were teenagers, Fight Club represented, a Hollywood representation, I suppose, or a segment of Fight Club represented anarchism, which is when they create this thing in Jack or Tyler Durden's house, like in this anti-establishment kind of profile, which was interesting. It was interesting to see, and of course, the 90s were a different decade in terms of cinema and the audience at the time. So you had things like Trainspotting and Fight Club and Requiem for a Dream and this kind of movies where
what in Britain is called the in-your-face movement.
And it was some of parts, of course, there's always this return to, oh no, but like, they were bad, like Fight Club was bad, but there was this exploration. Now, very unfortunately, and with the rise of the woke movement, Fight Club is now understood as this kind of like pro-macho aggression, kind of masculine, almost
white aggression,
white right-wing kind of personality, right? Because it's a men's club and this kind of thing, which I think it's unfortunate because you can't read things just as black or white. It's so reductive.
Well, because you know what? It's unfortunate. Because I have to interrupt you. Because it's not metaphorical. It becomes textual.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the white men must be just speaking,
white men. Yeah.
And the woman is just there for that. And so it's so, unfortunate, I'd say.
Yes, and degenerating. So just to go back to one other movie of our teenage years that I rewatched recently, that I was thinking, I was like, wow, I don't think we would read that movie within the context of nowadays the same we did before. And I actually don't want anybody of like the new generation to watch this movie, which is Hilary and Jackie. So
I've been thinking about that.
So Hilary and Jackie, first, I must say that we couldn't get a new one. We had to buy it like used because it's not available anymore, like on Amazon, or there's not, you can't buy a new movie of Hilary and Jackie. So Hilary and Jackie is about Jacqueline Dupre, who also faced her own degradation and degeneration because she had multiple sclerosis, and she was one of the most famous cellists in the 1960s and
70s,
70s, apologies, 70s, partner as well of another very famous pianist, Daniel Barenboim. She was British, and this movie is about her life. And I remember when we were teenagers, yourself, Sylvia, and I used to talk about Kiefer Finzi, the sister's partner,
the cuñado, the brother-in-law,
the sister's partner. And we used to say, he was a wonderful man, like the way he's impersonated by whoever the actor is like, the dream man, right? And like I remember Sylvia doing this British accent, like Kiefer Finzi or whatever. And then I watched the movie and I was like, oh, we wouldn't think that now. We wouldn't think, because the movie presents this pathological relationship between both sisters, where the famous sister asks Hilary to lend her husband for one night in bed, right? And Hilary basically begs the husband to sleep with Jackie, and he sleeps with her. And in our 15, 16, I'm not saying we were wrong, year old brains, we were like,
I was never okay with that.
I was never okay with it, but we didn't, like, I feel like if we were the same age and watched the movie now, we would have never been like, oh yeah, Kiefer Finzi, right? Because we would have been reading the story from a very different angle. I'm not saying that Kiefer Finzi is like, the ideal man, or that Kiefer Finzi is the demon. I mean, it's just, ways of reading the same story that, like, watching the movie 20 years later, now I'm like, oh, things have changed, right? Because now I see it with with not
with
only the
woke
eyes of
eyes.
my eyes, but the eyes of now, right?
Yeah, the eyes of now. And sometimes the eyes of now are my eyes. Sometimes they're not.
Of course, yes. And they should be. Some of the time they should be. Yeah,
yes, I
because
agree.
You're a teacher.
Yes, exactly. Otherwise, we wouldn't teach. In fact, well, but anyway, we are the eyes of the times. For me, the Hilary and Jackie. Okay, since I've been tripping balls on this woman's theory, Juliet Mitchell's theory on hysteria and how it acts with siblings, I've been thinking of Hilary and Jackie. Her.
Mm-hmm.
In the Madmen and Medusa's book, she. I would say it's very that story is very telling. Regardless if it's true or not or whatever, but just this thing of the siblings and just the weird or the certain passions and pathologies that are under that aren't very visible in our society. We tend to disregard, this is what she says, the sibling relationship, because whatever, you're just my sibling, you're just my peer, whatever. We tend to believe that there's no big power struggle, but there is, because it's the power struggle to be, not to be oppressed, but to be, because the sibling is my equal and you can take me as
and I think the relationship with the sibling is, of course, incredibly telling as well of how the parents integrated each other's, like, like one sibling into the other's worlds and vice versa, or how the parent handled brother, sister, whatever, and how they integrate, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's also very telling of the parenting.
Yeah, and like what you're saying about, even like, it happens in your lifetime, like you look back and you say, oh, like those things have become degraded, or I see them, I look down on them. When it kind of also makes emphasis on the truth, because in truth, well, even though we wouldn't tell our students to watch Hilary and Jackie in order to find a perfect man, but we did see him as a cool guy to have a relationship with, you know, in truth, that it's our past, even though it's degrading to us in our future.
So thank you for listening to us again. We won't make empty promises about when the next episode will be because we chew on things. So we'll have something to chew on for the next weeks, months, but we'll be back, hopefully.
We will. Ojalá.
Ojalá. We're in such linquigadl, and see you next time.
Yo soy Andrea Padilla.
Yo soy Andrea Martínez. Bye.